And well, sadly, Megan couldn't join us today, but she sent me some slides that we thought it was going to be important to present them before the dialogue itself. So I'm going to share my screen, and please let me know if you can see them. There. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So welcome to everyone to our third dialogue of the second series. This dialogue is going to be very important. As you saw in the poster, we're going to talk about navigating ethical tensions, complexities, and polarization. And discussing about this topic with Jackie and the speakers before joining the session, we realized that this dialogue is probably one of the most essential dialogues we have had in the series, as we are getting into learning more about relating across difference and how to respond to challenging contexts that require integration rather than reinforcing polarization. This is some beautiful wording by Jackie in the lesson platform last week. So last week, when discussing about this session with the speakers, we realized about the importance of reflecting first on the nature of dialogue, as nowadays it is a word that is everywhere, but we rarely are aware of what a dialogue actually is. So Megan Senek sent me this presentation, and she sadly couldn't join us today because she's at the UK, and because of the time zone, she was not able to join us. But I hope I will be able to make justice to these slides and to expose them in a way that would have be fairly exposed by Megan. So before properly starting, I think it is important to highlight the roots of the word dialogue, as we can see on the screen, which is dia, meaning through, and logos, which means word, thought, or meaning, making dialogue essentially a flow of meaning. So in dialogue, we seek to uncover a base of shared meaning that can greatly help coordinate and align our actions with our values, meaning that in order to understand the role of dialogue and generative conversation and how we can ensure the conditions to allow diverse perspectives, this comes from a shift in the way that we actually grasp the conversation itself. Megan often draws from David Bohm to remember that in generative dialogue, the ability to think and perceive differently is more important than the knowledge reached. So we do not engage in dialogue to get to a certain point, but the dialogue itself is already the point. In this nature of dialogue, it is about generating a conversation with a center and not with sides, which I think is one of the main ideas on how we can use dialogue to avoid further polarization. It is not only about speaking and being able to hold a stance, but it is also about being able to suspend and listen. In this sense, dialogue is a vehicle to learning and thinking together. It is a research methodology in itself. Conversation may not always yield new meaning, but new meaning will not take hold without conversation. So when engaging in dialogue, we are faced with a critical choice, whether we suspend our judgment and we start a reflective and generative dialogue, or whether we take a stance and we defend embedded patterns of seeing, thinking, and feeling, which often will lead to debate more than an actual dialogue. This often doesn't bring in the generative meaning that we're trying to look for, as suspending judgment and actually being able to listen and generate a conversation about a center without trying to hold a stance might create the conditions that are necessary for actually generating new meaning. So in dialogue, as we mentioned, it is not about trying to agree or trying to get to a point in which we can get to the same position. So that's why dialogue is not about convincing others about your position, but about suspending and generating the conditions that might further lead us to do something more integrative across difference. So taking this into account, Megan also tends to draw from William Isaacs this amazing quote that I think it's the key for what we're doing here. And it is that the intention of dialogue is to reach new understandings, and in doing so, to form a totally new basis from which to think and act. We do not merely try to reach agreement, we try to create a context from which many new agreements might come. So this is a very short introduction that we thought was necessary to do before we got into the session. I don't know if Jackie wants to add anything else before we give space to our speakers.
Thanks, Maria. Look, I think that was great. And I think this is what sets the conditions. What you've just shared sh creates the conditions for the dialogue. So you've done that beautifully, and it sets the story. So I think we're ready. I think the only other thing I would say is that listening is a really important element of the dialogue. So we're not passive attenders, observing a spectacle here. We're tuning in with all our senses, our ears and our hearing, but we're listening with our whole body. So I invite everybody to tune into that really deep way of listening, not just to notice what you've already heard before and know or reinforce that, not just to notice differences, but to actually go deeper, to step into the shoes of those that you're hearing from, and then lean in for what is wanting to emerge for our future, for an integral ecology. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jackie. So actually, this was a proposal by Germán. He's a phenomenologist. So he proposed that we should go first with Diane because she can lean into bringing to the table certain situations and concrete things that she has been working on. And then based on that situation, we can actually start thinking together about what we can do about it. So let me all introduce you to Sister Diane Beaumont. She is an Ursuline sister and has been an educator her whole life, from high school teacher, counselor, and principal to pastoral minister and retreat director. She has a background in literature and applied behavioral science. Nowadays, her ministry is a blend of leadership, communication, and justice. So welcome, Diane. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to begin with a story. I think stories tell a lot of truth. This is a story of one of our Ursuline sisters, excuse me, who's a principal of a school in New York for children with special needs. Her first year there, a little boy came into her office yelling his head off. So she let him sit and yell. At some point, he noticed a small little statue on her desk, and he said, "Who's the lady on the bench?" Well, Sister didn't go into details about how that was our founder, St. Angela Merici. She just told him that it was a good friend of hers that she liked to talk to. Then he asked if he could talk to the lady on the bench. And when Sister said yes, the little boy asked her to leave the room so he could talk to the lady on the bench. After that day, whenever he needs to talk, he's right there with the lady on the bench. Sometimes he even brings other children in to talk to the lady on the bench with him. When Sister was going out of the country for an extended time, he wanted to make sure she wasn't taking the lady on the bench with her, because he said, "I need her here. I need her." So, of course, she assured him that the lady on the bench would always be there for him. Incidentally, there's no more yelling in that office. He just talks to the lady on the bench. I told this story because I think that there's a lot of yelling going on in our world. I know in my country, the United States, there's been a lot of yelling for a long time now. The division and the polarization that we're talking about has reached an extreme that is quite frightening. I'm wondering if many in my nation might feel like that little boy, needing to yell their heads off because of the pressure of being unheard and unseen. And that pressure of being unheard and unseen, unlistened to, is just too much. The divide between us has grown immense, and we tend to see enemies at every turn and treat one another as enemies. Many are desperate for radical change, even possibly for violent revolution. And our present administration, as you know, is running headlong into that chaos of division. making the polarization here even greater. As a leader in my religious order, I'm a member of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, LCWR, which represents the majority of 35,000 sisters in the United States. And we often ask ourselves, in these times, what is ours to do? In these troubled times, what is ours to be? So in 2023, we began an effort to systematically address this polarization and division in our country with an effort that we call Transforming Grace, the work of transformative justice. It's grounded in contemplation and prayer, and in that grounding, we learned and taught one another skills and practices that will lead to decision-making and action toward right relationships, not only with the earth, but with all people. Key people in our congregations, religious women leaders, and justice promoters and communicators gathered for a training workshop to kick off these efforts. For the year preceding the 2024 election, weekly reflection materials were made available for our own personal and communal transformation. Using these, my congregation's Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation group promoted involvement with our sisters, our associates, our colleagues, our schools. We had monthly across the US Zooms for dialogue and inspiration. And these are continuing this year to aid us in building bridges, those bridges that we so much need. These reflection materials were extremely helpful, suggesting videos, songs, poetry, prayer, dialogue, questions, and practices. A lot of variety, meeting everybody's needs. They were all geared to personal transformation and change. Our belief is that we can only change the world if we ourselves are changed. Transformed people can transform the world. So we looked at the beauty of diversity as well as the way that we dehumanize each other. We so often demonize, demean, and divide. And we need to notice how we do those things because we all fall in those traps. We practice deep listening, like Jackie was talking about, listening to learn, not to win, not to fix, but simply to learn, to understand. We practice sincere questions, asking questions in curiosity. Tell me more. We use the motto, listening more, speaking less, because I think sometimes we forget to listen. We're so interested in saying what's important to us that we don't listen enough. We saw how curiosity about each one's differences could lead to empathy and understanding, could lead to finding common ground. Sort of that generative dialogue that Megan pointed out earlier, common ground. Some of the practices that were suggested may seem really simple to you, but they gave people an opportunity to look at things differently. Practices like watching the news from a source different from your own views, possibly a station that you do not trust or does not voice your opinion. Practices like listening to another story and introducing that person as if you were them, making I statements, getting inside their story, identifying with them. Practices like reaching outside our bubble of comfortable relationships to talk to someone of opposing views in a non-confrontational way. We've been deeply involved in this process for over a year, and lately I've been reviewing some of the things I learned. People find, a lot of us found, that we don't know too many people with opposing views. Many of us are very much in our own bubbles, our own comfort of friends. I also learned that there's a lot of fear about broaching our differences, even within our family and friend groups. A lot of fear about losing or damaging those relationships. But as our dialogue continued, I heard more experiences of people getting inside the story, the experience of others, not necessarily agreeing with their positions or their actions, but rather understanding where they were coming from, feeling with them. And that really diffuses the division and the tension. It softens us to others. I'll give you one example. I live in Northern California, but up further north, there's a county called Jefferson County. They call themselves Jefferson State, declaring that they're their own separate state, not attached to California, maybe not even attached to the United States. They're anti-government. Well, my friend, who's also involved in Transforming Grace with us, has a vacation home there in Jefferson County. And she decided that she wanted to know more about this anti-government position. So she did some simple listening. And with that listening, that deep listening that Jackie talked about, she learned that this is an agricultural county, and they were under some fierce water restrictions because we've been in drought for many years. And even though the drought is over, we're still conserving water very stringently. But they feel that those strictures are unfair for them and destructive of their livelihood as small farmers for generation on generation. So they're afraid of losing who they are. Well, to put it simply, my friend got a new perspective and a new understanding, not just of them being anti-government, but of them being so suffering the loss of who they were as a people. And as she was sharing this, I realized that I, like many others, had dismissed a whole group of people without knowing what they were suffering. It's so easy to label people as other, not like us, and that divide widens. I firmly believe that we're all connected. Actually, that we're all kin, relatives, people as well as all creatures, the trees, the rocks, the streams, the rivers. We're all kin. So this division and polarization that we experience is actually very painful, especially because it's so overwhelmingly huge in my country right now, and in such contradiction to my own values and Catholic social teaching. Recently, Elon Musk was quoted saying that the weakness of Western civilization is empathy. Let me repeat that. He thinks that weakness of Western civilization is empathy. But I think that empathy can be both our strength and our saving grace. Even as I watch daily the terrible disregard for the well-being of people and of all creation by our present administration in the US, don't get me started, it's a bad topic. I feel a visceral reaction in my body. terrible things are happening and people are hurting. Yet that reaction, yes, that reaction can bring a lot of anger, but it can also soften my own heart and heighten my resolve to be the change I want to see in the world. A few weeks ago, seeing President Zelensky from Ukraine bullied and insulted in the Oval Office sickened me. I was literally in tears watching. My response, though, to that suffering that I saw him going through was to immediately write to our sisters in Ukraine and Poland, assuring them of our continued support and telling them that that's not how all Americans are. We're not like that. And I even wrote a letter to President Zelensky himself, apologizing for the way he was treated and assuring him that many of us are proud of the leadership he has shown to the world. That's a very different response. It's the kind of empathy that I wish we had all the time in our world. I believe what Peter Block teaches, that we change the world one room at a time, one conversation at a time, one dialogue at a time. Maybe we change the world one bench at a time. And each conversation we have needs to reflect the future that we want to create. So we've been inviting more and more people to join us on the bench, so to speak, so that by talking, and even more by listening, and by being heard, hearts may be softened, so that we can see each other as kin rather than other, rather than enemy, rather than adversary. I know that the change we seek is taking a long time, and God knows I'm a most impatient person, but sometimes it even feels like we're going backwards. It's a slow process, as is all evolution. But each step, each conversation is bringing us closer to that future that we want. I'd like to share in closing a poem from one of our Transforming Grace reflections from last year during Lent. These words of wisdom for bridging the divide can bring us closer to realizing the future that we desire. Fast from words that divide. Feast on words that invite. Fast from either-or thinking. Feast on both and living. Fast from convincing certitude. Feast on space for uncertainty. Fast from anger. Feast on space for serenity. Fast from fear. Feast on being willing to listen, to speak, to listen. Fast from isolation. Feast on connection. Yes, we have many things to fast from and many things to feast on as we create this new world in listening, in dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. It was absolutely wonderful to listen to you. And before I give space to Angela, who's going to be our next speaker, I wanted to draw on the poem that you just read, because it reminded me of Saint Augustine. In the Soliloquies, he said that sometimes we have to start from faith, which is knowing where we want to get to without having the reasons to know why we already know it. But then through a process, we can actually find the reasons on why we believed in that, and we can turn our faith into certainty. So I think it's very interesting to feast on the uncertainty that you just mentioned, and knowing that even in uncertainty, believing that there's something we can actually get to might be the start for actually start developing something that will get us there. So thank you so much for sharing your story. And
You're welcome.
Professor Angela Calvo. Angela Calvo is a PhD emeritus professor at the Philosophy department at Pontificia Universidad Javeriana. Her main research areas include modern philosophy, especially David Hume, contemporary moral and political philosophy, Freud, critical theory, and citizenship. She's an active member of the International Hume Society and also the author of the book, The Character of True Philosophy in David Hume, along with several articles, book chapters, and papers on national and international conferences. Angela is a winner both of the biennial Javeriana Research Prize and the Javeriana Research Prize Life and Work. She has been member of the university's Board of Governors and the Council of Regents. So without further preamble, welcome, Angela. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you, Diane, for your very inspiring introduction to this dialogue from a very important experience of empathy. What I want to recall from your talk is that meeting with others, dialogue, and stepping towards the future needs to be slow. Democracy, inclusion, and critique needs slow thinking and time just to listen deeply to others' suffering. So on that spirit, I will try to talk about what is happening today in our world, where everybody is outraged, the left, the right, the women, the men, everybody. But there is something paradoxical in this situation. I will quote the starting paragraph of one of Axel Honneth's, one of the critical theorists alive now, from a book, The Idea of Socialism. He starts the book by saying this: our contemporary societies are characterized by a puzzling divide. On the one hand, discontent with the current socio-economic state of affairs, with contemporary economic and working condition, has increased enormously in recent years. More than ever, people are outraged at the social and political consequences unleashed by the global liberalization of the capitalist market economy. On the other hand, this widespread outrage seems to lack any sense of direction, any historical sense of its ultimate aim. As a result, this widespread discontent has remained oddly mute and introverted, giving the impression that it simply lacks the capacity to think beyond the present and imagine a society beyond capitalism. The disconnect between this outrage and a vision of a better world is a novel phenomenon in the history of modern societies. This introductory paragraph seems to me an insightful approach to the decline of critique we are experiencing. In what follows, I will start by characterizing critique as a powerful device of modernity, and especially will focus in the main motives of critical theory, one of the most influential paradigms in social philosophy that emerged just a century ago in the context of the Frankfurt School. Curiously enough, though, with the change of the century, critical theory, and in a broader sense, critique in itself, has become a figure of the past. We could say, well, if critique has declined, maybe things are going on better. But the reality is quite different. Things are every day worse. Our divides, polarization, discontents, and demands for justice and solidarity are greater, but unfortunately we have forgotten, or I don't know what would be the proper word. We have forgotten that we have both intellectual and emotional capacities to transform the world. As you said, the language of revolution is not an alternative nowadays. It's a work like sewing, like knitting, is step by step, is an everyday task, but we must be alert on the opportunities as well as on the unfortunate backgrounds that make us just discard the other, just reinforce our dogmatic views of the world, and mainly we live without asking reflective questions. I will start by saying that although philosophy is in itself, since Greek philosophy, linked, attached to the idea of logos. Logos is a very important word that has two phases. On the one hand, as the quote which Megan sent us to the start, logos is reason, but on the other side, logos is language. So language, we are people who characterize ourselves as speaking and reasoning beings. So from the start, our identity is an effect of social interaction, but our identity is not a stable rock. Identity flows, and identity is fragile. Identity can be damaged, because since we build a normal, say, or a non-pathological sense of ourselves through mutual recognition, it's another way to say empathy. On the contrary, we have a pathological self-construction if we are exposed continuously to humiliation, disrespect, misrecognition, and if we feel like discarded by people around us. I don't know if you have seen a series that I will strongly recommend. It's terribly violent and terribly sad, but it's nearly put in Netflix. Is Adolescence. It's a British series. I want to spoil it for you, but it's the story of a boy. I would say a boy, 13 years, I think, is a boy who is involved in a criminal assault, and what you see along the series is that there is no extreme familiar problems to make that situation responsible of the effects in the boy. He participates in a fairly good school, public school. So there is no terrible background as sometimes in countries like Colombia we have. He just grew up in a normal, say, environment. However, what is discovered along the series is that he felt that he was seen as ugly, as stupid, without any value in terms of the other students, obviously, especially for the girls. So he was terribly sad. He was suffering a lot, and he tried hardly to offer friendship to some girls, which definitely mock on him and avoid any contact with him. So obviously, I don't think that justifies what happened, but I think it helps us to explain how people, even though we have a lot of commodities around, we have money, we have apparently control over the world in nowadays, people are feeling extremely alone, extremely solitary, extremely unconnected. And that lack of connection makes people think that life is not worth living. So suicide or assassination are both alternatives, desperate alternatives in front of a world that seems to be deaf and mute to you. In that context, I think that the word of philosophy, education, and other social sciences need to be heard. A signal that I could see from the pandemic on, these years have been very threatening for humanity, really, is that in the political realm or in the scientific realm, there wasn't really a word that could promote truth or justice or beauty. Everybody, all the credentials that universities are giving now to people, and which eagerly everybody seeks for, seem to be useless to be able to respond to that sort of terrible calamities in human beings and in nature, of course. So I do think that we have to return to the spirit of philosophy. Philosophy, since the beginning, is the vocation of philosophy is freedom. The philosophy as a way of life, more than any sort of profession or erudition. Philosophy as a way of life is aimed to liberate us from all sorts of enslaving practices, habits, language, ideology, and all that. But so critical thinking needs to be both very clear in diagnosis. I don't think really that all the literature and all the political activists that have focused on the last 50 years, at least, just injustice, have reached the real problem. Today, conflicts and demands, even though they have no word yet, are about recognition. People need to be praised, to be valued, not only in themselves, but as a tiny drop that can change the world. If we don't help people doing that, then peace is impossible, and also the democratic ethical life is impossible. In this sense, we all belong to a Catholic universities. I have been very surprised, really, that the only leader that had a word and still has a word in this situation is Pope Francis. And that means that I think that we need spiritual voices to mediate in between polarization and divide. When I say spiritual, I'm not speaking exactly or just reducing spiritual life to religions. We have to, Habermas says, in a sense, we have to translate the message of hope embedded in most religions. We have to translate it for people that are not musical to religion, that are not believers, so that the emotional and existential message can be internalized by all citizenship. In that context, critique, I think, is an important device. Critique is just the spirit of self-observing persons and societies. When you observe properly, with enough time and with enough interest, you can see that in modern times and in contemporary times, there are open possibilities for a democratic ethical life. But there is a tremendous gap between the possibilities, the ideals, and reality. That gap must be filled with normative ideas, with social practices, with political discourses, and in a sense, with social movements and a special sort of dialogues that can understand that we can reach those ideals, open in modernity, but these ideals have been completely submerged under the logic of capitalist market. The critical theorists speak of immanent critique as a method, or reconstructive critique. What is that? It is the critique that is not from abstract speculative ideas, just blind to social reality, but is also different from internal criticism that only allows the already active movements in society. What is the problem to focus on the idea of liberation in already established social movements, that they can be looking for a misconception of recognition? They must be losing the point, and also they usually exclude voices that have never heard. So this immanent critic tries to find implicit possibilities of the daily practices and self-understanding of people in society. It is both grounded in social reality and emancipatory, because it seeks to transform it radically. So there is always a tension in critique that is what is lost in polarization or in divide. The language of critique is dialogical, necessarily. Is the looking for different perspectives just to find reasonable alternatives that can be accomplished by just not perfect beings, but vulnerable and fallible people that just have the hope and the trust enough of the company that will follow an ideal and can transform step by step the world. Of course, immanent critique emphasizes the downsides of uncoupling normative argument from social analysis. But the critical thinking needs a reference in daily life. We have to find in people, which is very difficult now, a pre-theoretical resource, either an empirical interest or a moral experience that demands transformation. Nowadays, there are two threatening conditions for what this pre-theoretical resource is the subjective condition of transformation. As Diane said, it is impossible to transform society if we do not try to transform ourselves. Without internal transformation, personal transformation, it's impossible to change the world. But modern contemporary societies are societies which think, erroneously, of course, that the great ideal of modernity, which is freedom, to be modern is to feel that you are free. People think that nowadays they are free, but that's just a delusion. All this working at home, not having a terrible boss threatening you all the time, saying you must, has been changed for the most subtle way of domination, that is motivation. Now we have changed the you must for the you can. So the moral imperative is you can not say I can't. That's terrible. And besides that, the other imperative is you must be happy. That's why sociological pathologies tend to be now moved to personal pathologies. No wonder that I think half of my students nowadays are medicated. They use psychiatric drugs, and that's a way, a very easy way, not to focus on where is the problem. That is the social paradigm of just workaholic people, just efficiency, just production, a form of life that is mere subsistence. There is no sense of living. In that sense, we face a problem. I was wondering how Diane motivated these people in these big groups around the world to that practices because what we find is that people have naturalized a world where the question about if the only important question, said Albert Camus, the only important question if life is or not worth living. People avoid those questions. People try to numb their vulnerability, and so they feel that they can live narcissistically just connected to the screens without any real communication. So there is a terrible paradox. We are all the time connected, but we are not communicated. Real communication, it generates community. So there is impossible to communicate without creating communities of sense. And in that sense of critique, what has become the other tension? If there is no motivation, internal motivation from citizenship to transform the world won't be transformed mechanically. That's impossible. I find that there is a clue that we have to explore more. Suffering is even greater than, okay, I will finish in a minute. Suffering is greater than in previous times where we had less wealth and less power. People are suffering really more. So if we capitalize suffering and make resonance between my suffering and other suffering, I am not in Ukraine, I know. I am not in other places of Colombia that are in a permanent war, but my suffering can resonate with other suffering, and that may impulse me, motivate me to make a common ground with that people and construct hope. So I would say, as an alternative, not as nice and beautiful as the poem you read, but I would say that alternatives come from three movements. The first movement will be from talking to listening. I agree completely that we are so alone that everybody you meet is like a parrot. They just want to occupy your ear like if it was a wastebasket. But that's not listening. So privilege listening, serious listening, so people can develop a voice. Second, instead of discard the difference, because it is difficult to cope with, we should try to make efforts in mutual recognition, but I insist in daily life practices. This is not a big job. This is in daily life. And the third device, I would say, is try to move our emotional geography from fear to hope. That I will finish at that point.
Thank you so much, Angela. I think it was very thought-provoking. I actually wrote down a lot of things that I want to ask you afterwards, so when we engage in conversation. But before that, I'm going to give space to our last speaker, which is Germán Calderon. So Germán Calderon Legarda is a philosopher from Trinity College with several postgraduate studies in human rights, bioethics, and political science, while also having a PhD in political science from the Pontificia University of Chile. His main research areas involve the intersection between ethical and political theory, the politics of recognition, and phenomenology. Germán is currently a professor at the Javeriana's Bioethics Institute, having a broad experience in research, seminars, and conferences, both nationally and internationally. He has directed research projects between the CCEIA and Javeriana regarding human rights, truth commissions, and the ethics of recognition, while also being the author of several publications, such as the book Bioethics, Rights and Human Capacities, and the article The False Dichotomy Between the Absolute and the Relative regarding the problem of euthanasia. So without further preamble, Germán, you're welcome. I'm going to share what you sent me. And there, can you all see my screen? Yeah. Okay, so Germán, you can go. I don't see him in the session. Wait. I'm going to message him.
Okay.
With us just a second ago. So
he might have dropped out. And I think in the meantime, Maria, we've heard incredibly rich input from Diane and amazingly rich input as well from Angela. So it's an opportunity just to see what's resonating with you from what you've heard so far.
yeah,
And hold the space for yourself to listen to that in your body, in your being right now, while Maria searches for Germán. And if he can't join us right now, we could open the floor for
Thank you.
Great.
I'm very sorry. By accident, I go down. Maybe I was too afraid. I don't know.
A little rabbit hole. Don't worry.
Well, Maria del Mar, thank you very much for graduating me as a phenomenologist. I'm far from being a real phenomenologist. I have a long way to go, but anyway, thank you very much. And thank you very much for sharing this piece, which I wanted you to be able to read. I start with a philosopher, Jewish American philosopher, Judith Clark, because I think she has a very deep thinking about what negative situations or what she calls negative moralities are. I do think that we should have a look into this, because maybe that should be a way to understand moral phenomenology, if you want, better. Are you listening to me now?
Yep, we can listen perfectly.
Yeah, I'm just trying to put I have here some, well, I start this piece thinking about the opposition between universalism and relativism, and that brings me to the idea that there has always been a very deep conflict between absolute universalism and extreme ethical relativism. Many of our troubles in moral conflicts come from there. Somewhere I said before that we need a context-sensitive universalism. If we want to apply, or if we want to think of universal values, we should think of some form of context-sensitive universalism. That's some idea which is easy to say, but not very easy to realize. How we get close to that? Maybe we should find a common ground when we live in societies which are full of conflicts, and we pretend that through dialogue we can overcome those conflicts, and to some degree that's true. But as a matter of fact, we don't really dialogue, or we don't really achieve much by saying that we're going to enter dialogue. So once we talk about having a common ground, despite our cultural differences and despite our very opposed worldviews, when we talk about having a common ground, maybe we are making a serious mistake when we think or convince ourselves that we can just enter into dialogue like that. I mean, dialogue is not something we should come to without having some notion or some form of preparation of what it is about or how we can have it. Dialogue is not simply the exchange, or cannot be the exchange of points of view. One of the problems with discursive ethics, which are very interesting, is that maybe they start attempting to enter into dialogue very fast or at a very early stage. So it is important that we look into what are our shared values and ideas. But if we stay or if we remain there, we run the risk, as Sister Diane has said, that we are talking or we are sharing common ideas with those who think like those, and not with those who think differently. And what is interesting, if we only establish dialogue with those who share our values, we come to a dead end. We have to take some previous steps for dialogue. We have to have common interests and some possibilities of acting. If we recognize in the intercultural dialogue that the difference, or even in the dialogue within cultures, that there is a great difference or great differences between all of us, maybe we'll come to the scenarios of dialogue with a better preparation. Maybe our critical meta-theoretical considerations will be wedged in a better, in a more complete context. I was thinking of an example that occurred to me recently, some years ago, in a native community. Are you listening to me okay? Are you?
Yep, we can hear you. It's perfect.
Can you understand me?
Yeah.
my phonetics, I have to tell you that my phonetics are not something I'm too happy about, because I never took care to have good phonetics in English. So I have a terrible accent. Maria del Mar has a beautiful accent. I have a terrible accent. So I hope that's not. If you have problems with that, you just tell me. I won't be upset.
It's fine. We're following you perfectly.
I want to tell you that I have phonetic dignity, so I just tell me if you had any problems with the way I pronounce something. So I was thinking of an example years ago here in Colombia. A native community, original people, as we say now in the politically correct way, had the idea that they had to punish some members of the community because they had done wrong. They had stolen some things that belong to the community, something like that. And the way they were going to punish these members of the community was by submitting them to whipping in a public space. Now, the Colombian Constitution prohibits any acts of violence, But at the same time, the Colombian Constitution allows native communities to apply their own system or law for certain things, not for everything. The Human Declaration of Human Rights says that nobody can be submitted to punishment that is against his or her integrity and her human dignity. So there came all this debate, all those big faults that the Colombian Constitution could not allow them to whip the members of the community that were going to be punished. Well, this created a number of reactions. Amnesty International, who wrote certain letters, human rights activists manifested themselves in contrary to this. I myself signed a petition for this punishment not being applied. The day came of the act, and the community tried to bring about this form of punishment. At the end, they couldn't do it because the women of the group, particularly wives, sisters, mothers, daughters of the men who were going to be whipped, did not allow it. And at the end of the day, so much opposition to this punishment was effective, we could say, to some degree, because they didn't do it. But they didn't carry this out, not so much because of the petitions that many of us signed, but rather because the women in the group opposed this action. Well, that was the story, simple. At the end of the day, the members of the community were not given this physical punishment, which is prohibited by Colombian Constitution, of course. And of course that we condemn physical punishment. We are all more or less in agreement with that. But I somehow felt at the time, I somehow felt uncomfortable. I felt that there was something that was out of place. And a few months later, somebody had the opportunity to talk to these people who were in the group who was to be punished. And she asked them, well, what did they think about the situation in which we were involved when they were going to be submitted to a physical punishment by the community. Most to the surprise of many people, what they say is that they really didn't fear about the physical pain that the punishment was going to cause them. That the real fear they had was to be expelled from the communities. Because for them, the real painful thing was not the physical punishment, but being expelled from the communities, which they did not do. Now, what I discovered, because I was feeling very guilty because of my lack of enthusiasm for the petitions, which I repeat, I signed it. What I discovered later on is that we were assuming, the rest of us were assuming that the most terrible thing that they could undergo was the whippings, to be whipped. But for them, the real fear was to be expelled from their communities. Now, had they been expelled from their communities, nobody would have said anything. I mean, that wasn't terrible for us. We didn't know that. And the point of the example is, of course, I'm not making apology of physical punishment, not in the least. But the real trouble was that we didn't know what was important for them. So there was all this big fuss around, but no one of us imagined that wasn't the important part for them. And the example, I take this example because it initiates a way of reflection that many times, and every so often, we try to dialogue without knowing really what the other think or feel or want. The there are other examples. Once there was a famine someplace in Africa, and the relief workers noticed that the food that was being given to them was disappearing. And what happens was that in this community, the elderly were very important. So they were bringing all the food to save the elderly people, and rather than the others. And relief workers were getting really exasperated by this attitude, but they didn't know that in that community, what was important was to save the elderly. So then again, they were condemned for this behavior, but they didn't know what was important for them in that community. Well, so when we look at others, other cultures, we want to start a dialogue, but we don't really know what they are thinking or what they are feeling or what is important for them. So we apply moral principles to all kinds of experiences without knowing. We often run the risk of applying positive moral principles to negative experiences. I mean by negative experiences of hunger, of war, of displacement, and all that. When we don't know what is important for others, for communities which are different, well, we run the risk of making many mistakes, but we run the risk that no communication will be effective in those cases. Now, we have many possible models that help us to have a better understanding of how we deal with groups of people or within our own communities. We must realize that our own definition of groups is itself problematic. How we define a group. We can define a group by culture, by language, by professions, by places. So when we face this question of universal values versus relativism, we can apply Kantian universal principles. We can apply human moral sentiments, human rights, hermeneutics. We can apply the phenomenology of the social world, the model of human capabilities as Nussbaum, even psychoanalysis, etc., etc. And of course, we can also apply all the descriptions of the social sciences. Now, just to take one example, I sort of direct my criticism to a philosopher that I admire, but whose discursive ethics and derivative theories from there always creates the impression that we are always willing and disposed for a good dialogue. I do tell the students that Habermas is very good philosopher for the seminar room when we're doing a seminar. But in the realities of the outside world, we don't have a situation of dialogue among equals. So in the midst of social conflict, we always remain uncertain as to how we could make both ends meet. Which are those ends? The normative ends, what we must do, what we should do, with the descriptive word of the social, descriptive word of the communities. How can we make those ends meet? Remember Hume. Angela, you are the word expert in Hume, and you will tell me if I am wrong, but Hume reminded us that we cannot derive an oath from an ist. We know from describing the world how it is, we cannot derive oaths, we cannot derive norms. And we are far from there. So much for those models, but in the case of discourse communicative ethics of Habermas, it seems that we start or we pretend to have a dialogue when we are not ready for it. And if we take all models, the hermeneutical models, the deliberative way we do bioethics, we are going to find that dialogue is useful. Of course, it's useful, but there is a long way to say that we really have achieved a form of dialogue which is somehow effective. I want to suggest that we look into a particular alternative, which is a little bit marginal with respect to other philosophical traditions, but which shares with all of you with the ideas that Sister I forgot her name, Diane, I'm sorry, Diane, and Angela has given us. In some ways, I feel closer to that. This alternative could lead us to a common ground, and that's the alternative of looking and reflecting on human suffering. How do we reflect on human suffering? I mean by human suffering here, the suffering that is inflicted by others, not that the suffering that is caused by natural disasters or by nature. Though today we could say that even natural disasters are the consequences of not having treated nature the way we should. But anyway, I'm talking about human suffering caused by others. And human suffering is, of course, and this I am very close to Angela, is characterized by denial and misrecognition. Denial and misrecognition of the others. And this is a common human experience, whether we are talking about oppression, discrimination, crime, slavery, and so on and so forth. That is what Judith Clark, whom you presented the paragraph, Judith Clark calls Faces of Injustice, which is a book by her. What Judith Clark says there, or the central idea of Faces of Injustice, this is from another book which is called Ordinary Vices. But in Faces of Injustice, what Judith Clark says is that we must deal with injustice, or perhaps injustices in plural, in its own right. Not with reference to a general, all-encompassing idea of justice. That means we must look at injustices in its own right, in their own right. We always look at injustices in the face of some thinking of a theory of justice, of a general theory of justice. It's as if injustices are the reverse side of justice. But what Clark tells us is no, injustices have value as such. They are a difference. They are a plurality of evils that we must look into. And in that, I repeat, injustices are to be looked into, not with reference to a general, all-encompassing idea of justice. And there we have thinkers like Schlar, Richard Bernstein, Avishai Margalit, and Alex Honnold himself. Though Honnold at the end puts forward a positive idea of, or at least tries to deal with the question of injustice through recognition. Now, if I mentioned that we must have, in the normative world and in the political world, we must create a common ground. And that common ground is by, or that common ground allowed us to have a human understanding through the study of the attention we pay to injustices. And I am going to refer in the last part to our ideas of human dignity, for instance. We have many ideas about human dignity, which lead to many different notions. Either we can have a total adherence to human dignity. We can support the idea of human dignity even as a metaphysical or religious notion, or we can be skeptical about human dignity. Ruth Macklin, McIntyre, they are both examples of philosophers who are skeptical about human dignity. They think there are other things, but not human dignity. Now, for the purpose of this exercise, I shall remain agnostic about human dignity. I will not say that it is a metaphysical fixed notion, but I won't deny that it can be an important idea in the long run. Not so much an important idea as a useful notion. We can create a notion of human dignity. We can describe a notion of human dignity. We can approach it. If we identify those situations which are oppose or the negation of human dignity, which are disrespect, humiliation, vulnerability, suffering in general. How do we understand human dignity? We understand human dignity by looking into those situations which are considered the opposite of human dignity. So we have a sort of negative idea of human dignity. We don't have a definition as such. Of course, we can, because of religions or philosophical inclinations, we may have an idea of human dignity, but I am saying that here it would be very useful not to use an essential, substantial notion of human dignity, but rather understand human dignity from the plurality of injustices. From those situations where human dignity are absent, we recognize human dignity. So, in that sense, and when Angela says we are vulnerable, fallible people, I think that's the quid of the matter. That's true. Therefore, to achieve recognition, we need to identify humiliation, misrecognition, negation, and absence of decent, non-dignity conditions. First, to do that, in order to do that, we first need to achieve acknowledgement. That would be the first step. And then to achieve recognition in its plurality. Recognition that avoids injustice, the recognition that faces injustices. And that is, so that's why I said at the beginning that I appeal to negative moralities, because negative moralities identify themselves with human suffering. And only by identifying human suffering, we can have some form of universalization. There is a second part to all this, which is how can we have universalism, but that is not context insensitive. But I think I'm going to leave it like that there, because I don't want to, I'm sure that there are questions and things to discuss. I hope I say something. Well, I finish there because I don't have anything to say for now. I finish.
Thank you, Germán.
That's a good reason to finish. Yeah.
It was a very thought-provoking intervention as well. And I actually think that there are a lot of things to talk about. Actually, Valentina was also messaging me that she had a lot of things to say regarding the three interventions. And I also noted some things. I'd like to bring the notes that I kind of made.
Should we invite everyone to turn on their screen so we can have a dialogue with each one?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
If you all feel comfortable, it would be great if you could turn on your cameras or microphones so that we can engage on dialogue. Thank you, Diane. Germán, and yeah, maybe Angela. Okay, so before we get into more things, I wanted to bring into the table this one philosopher that I know both Germán and Angela also enjoy, and that I think that the three interventions brought a sort of thought-provoking process that can bring me back to him, and this man is Charles Taylor. So regarding Angela's intervention, Taylor has this book called The Ethics of Authenticity, and he starts this book by looking at several illnesses, malaces that are found in modernity, and he starts by saying that the main issue, it's an inarticulate debate, which I think it's also one of the ideas that we're having here in dialogue, and it's what are the necessary conditions for us to be able to engage in dialogue. So regarding this thing about ideals and, for example, freedom, authenticity, etc., that Angela also mentioned, Taylor notices that first, before being able to engage in conversation, we have to clarify our ideals, because if we do not have a clarity on what we're talking about, it might be possible that we are talking about completely different things and we're not going to be able to articulate a conversation that's actually going to lead to something. That what's important about Charles Taylor is that this is just the beginning point in which he starts leading to this necessity of this need of recognition in the public sphere, which is probably one of the things that I have highlighted more about Diane, Angela, and also Germán, and also leading to stop fragmentation. I think that at the end of this book, Charles Taylor makes a sort of diagnosis in which he says that the crisis of democracy that we have today, it's also because people start identifying themselves within their small groups while not having like this general ideal that can actually unite them into something bigger. So people start identifying themselves with their small identitary groups, as for example, we mentioned at first, men, women, certain minorities, etc. And this devoids also a possibility of connection in order to find a common goal and actually start generating change. But what I find important about this is what Angela mentioned about that the language of critique, it's dialogical, and therefore it's about maintaining the tensions. It is not about just filling the gaps, but also maintaining the tensions, and amidst that tension, trying to get and do something that might actually be transformational, right? So also regarding this ideal of freedom, it's important because I noticed, Angela, that some of parts of your intervention also drawn from Byung-Chul Han. Han, in one of his books, talks about the word freedom and says that this word has the same roots of the word friend, for example, and that in its origins, free means belonging to friends and lovers. And that's why if we consider human character as belonging as a dialogical character, it means that we're fundamentally built in this dialogue, and that being free means also being belonging to friends and lovers and a community, and not just trying to be devoid of all that so that we can be our most authentic selves and hold our stances and be free in what we think without taking care of what any other person thinks. Because even if we do think that we are devoid from all of these connections, it is actually important to recall that even if someone lives completely alone, Taylor mentions they might even maintain an internal dialogue their whole lives with their parents, with God, with whatever. So we cannot ignore this dialogical character of human beings. That's something that was running through my mind during all your three interventions. But I also see that Jackie is eager to talk, and Valentina is too. So this, I think it's very interesting, and I really want to listen to what everyone else is thinking.
Thanks, Maria. I just wanted to add to that, that when we feel that we have friends and lovers and community with the earth, with creation, so it is with each other, it is with our creator, our maker, whoever that might be that we connect with, or perhaps we don't, and that's a real absence. But also it is with the community of creation. And so if we feel loved by the water we drink, if we feel, you know, loved by the food that we consume in our bodies, if we feel community with what we're observing around us in the clouds, the wind, creation, the trees, if we feel connected and loved and befriended, as Diane was saying, kin, that has so much meaning in terms of how we're held, how we recognize this beautiful theme of recognition that's come through this dialogue, of being acknowledged by the birds, not just the humans, by the sun. This is a transformative way of being, isn't it? So thanks, Maria. You've just opened that freedom up in a beautiful way for us. But I want to pause because there's wonderful people here to share what's resonating with them, and they may have questions too, but feel free to join the dialogue.
Thanks, Jackie. Valentina wants to speak, but she said she'll wait for us to give her the word. So just go ahead, Val. Feel free to speak. I cannot listen. Do you see her?
You called on me,
Yes.
or
Yep.
okay,
Go ahead.
yes, okay. Yeah, I was like, let me wait until Mar, like, because I don't know, my interventions are a bit long, so I apologize beforehand, but I don't know, I really love this type of dialogues, because for people who maybe don't like know me, but I have been friends with Maria Mal since high school, and we have always had this type of philosophical debates ever since we were young. And my background now is mostly on international relations, conflict, peace studies, and restorative justice in Latin America and other parts in the world. So not really philosophical, but I really enjoy this type of dialogues. And I feel that like there has been so much input by the three speakers that are very relevant to my personal life and also like my life as a young scholar and as part of academia. And I'm going to start with the first part that is kind of my personal life. And I feel that, I mean, I'm talking a bit low because it's 2 a.m. in Switzerland right now. So that's why. But kind of, I feel that our generation, and that was something that Angela was saying, that is, I think we have lost this kind of sense of being uncomfortable. Like people hate being uncomfortable per se, and of not knowing. Like people have lost this type of willingness to be uncomfortable when it comes to political discussions and to these type of things. People no longer want to be in a difficult situation where they don't know what it's being talking about, or where they are confronted from their own ideals. And I feel that that is something very wrong that has been lost, because then what does this in practice translates to? It basically translates to censorship and always trying to be politically correct in academic and intellectual circles. And this is very dangerous because academia should be a place where you can kind of freely speak your mind and engage in conversations with others. But when you try to kind of make friends with other academics and you try to kind of be the nice person, then you will avoid kind of voicing your own opinions in fear that they will not like you or that you will be excluded from these type of circles. And that has never been the goal of academia. The goal of academia has always been to kind of expand and share for more people to join. And I feel that censorship and being always politically correct has come to a point in academia where you can blatantly see it, like now in the US, where they have been targeting specific students, PhD students who are not aligned with the state ideals. And you don't see this only in the US, but you see it like across countries, specifically in countries where there's not secularism, but there's an ethnocentric state religion. So for example, specifically, I can think of Sri Lanka and Myanmar, or Ceylon and Burma, however you want to call them, where it's kind of this state ideal that is imposed on everyone else. But yeah, going back to kind of my personal life, because I mixed it a bit. Yeah, I feel that people have lost this type of ability to be uncomfortable with others. And I can see that because in my academic circles, I have this peer that he comes from a very conflicting country in the Middle East. And when they were saying that the first step is to recognize the other, but he struggles a lot with recognizing the existence of others. And if you don't have that, like there's no dialogue at all, because if he's not agreeing or disagreeing, if he doesn't believe that something is true, he will just completely discard it. So everything has become so propagandized to an extreme level of media that we consume every single day, that people are not willing to be uncomfortable. So I find that this is like the first issue that I wanted to tackle. And then the second thing that I find very important is the kind of, I had notes, but kind of the idea of human suffering and human dignity in the others, because I find that that is what makes us relate to other people. And one of like the big things why I entered academia was because my family has been displaced by the conflict in Colombia. And thankfully, I have never experienced violence directly, but I have heard about it through my family. And in my career as an academia person, I hear about it all the time. When today in class, we were talking specifically about Syria, and a massacre just happened in the past few weeks where more than 1,000 people were massacred in the coastal region of Syria. And that immediately hit me. Like, I don't live there. I have no connection to the Middle East, but I am human and I can understand what it is. So I find that the concept of human suffering and people not being able to kind of see the humanity when you talk about this type of things is very preoccupying to me, and more when it comes to conflicts, regional conflicts in the political thought, because most people in academia just stay in political thought but never see that this has a real human impact. Like, people are suffering these type of things is every day. Like, it's not something that you choose to talk in class one day and then you leave and then that's it. Like, people live these things every single day for years, for decades. So I find that that is a very interesting concept, and as well the idea that everyone just wants to always talk and talk and talk and never listen. And that is like the base point of negotiation. And I feel that is because in our generation that we have so many outlets of media and stuff, everyone wants to participate, but no one ends up hearing us. So we crave attention and we crave someone to listen to us. Anything that we have to say, we crave it, but we never like listen truly to other people. And I find as well like also something very, very important and very like valuable. And then you also mentioned the crisis of democracy nowadays. I mean, the US, the land of democracy, has been put into human rights watch list. So that was, I mean, a bit unsurprising for someone with my background. I mean, you could see coming miles away from the first Trump administration, you could see this coming. But I feel that people are starting to realize that not everything is like the grass is not greener in the West, but the East and the global South has always also had a very important philosophical discussions and intellectual discussions that should be taken into account, not only the main ideas in the West, but also in the East. So I find that something very important in that sense, and in the sense that the crisis of democracy today, I feel, is the lack of trust that we have in institutions, and then as well the lack of participation or political participation that there is, because people are not informed. People do not trust the institution anymore, and people feel, as, for example, some of the speakers said, more close to their own communities, and they don't like the sense of an ethno-national state is no longer there. Like, the nation state as we know it today has been dismantled. Like, there are only a few national states that are left. Like, one of them is Japan, for example, that majority of the people living in Japan are Japanese and share the same culture, religion, and language. These type of things are no longer like evident. Like, another one could be Sri Lanka or Myanmar, but they have their own issues, or India even, that is the biggest democracy in the world. But we have become so multicultural with so many ideas that there's this craving for acceptance, but this is not always like gained. So that's an issue as well, like of like kind of this open policy of, yeah, we are a multicultural thing, but sometimes as well we're losing the things that are like uniting us as people in individual countries. So lines are starting to become very blurred. So I feel that that is like an issue for democracy nowadays as we see it. But yeah, I think that my main take is that everything has to be tailored to the situations. I really like the example of justice, because I also have a background kind of on transitional justice and restorative justice. And the most important thing in that sense is you don't have to put yourself in a position of what I believe is good for others without even asking them what do they need, which is kind of what Germán was saying about the native communities in Colombia, that you didn't really know what was important for them, but what was important for you, because comes from a place of empathy. Like, I feel that maybe Germán said, like, it would be harder for me to be punished physically more than being excluded from a community. But for them, it was the opposite. So it comes from empathy, but we cannot let this type of empathy kind of blur our perspective as academics. Like, we have to take a step back and be, okay, I would do this in the position of them, but I'm not in the position of them. So how can I do this without, it's called conflict sensitivity and context sensitivity, that it was like the second part that he wanted to extend. I don't know, I just find there are a lot of important things that were mentioned, and I know that I'll go more in depth educating myself in like the philosophical perspective of this. I concentrate mostly on the political side, but the philosophical side to apply to my daily life is something that I get a big takeaway from today. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. It's great to hear from you. And I see that there's also two other people that want to ask questions. So I know Bella and JP, both of you want to ask something. I don't know which one of you wants to go first, but feel free to just turn on your microphone and participate.
Okay, hi, I'm Bella, and I just had a question. It was something about, I think it was Angela that said it, just kind of resonating in other people's suffering and how important that is, and relating to everybody's experiences and making everyone feel kind of heard and listened to. But I just had a question about that, because if people have these conversations and they talk about their suffering and they're sharing it, do you think there's ever the risk of people thinking that their own suffering becomes more important than other people's? And how do you like balance listening and sharing with, balancing listening and sharing without letting people think that their suffering, depending on how it's phrased, is like more important than other things that are going on? And this is just more like a question than like a discussion. Sorry.
I think it's a great question. Angela, do you want to reply to what Bella just asked?
Yes, that's a quite difficult question. What I found in research, for instance, with women that have lived within the conflict in Colombia, from different sort of humiliation, either violations, either the assassination of some of their family members or whatever, feel before conversations start, feel that they were the only ones that have to cope with that. And that's I think the wrongful part of the language of forgiveness, because forgiveness sometimes mean that you keep silent. And I think where there have been tests in groups that when you just hear or listen, that there are other sort of sufferings with which you can resonate. Obviously, my suffering will be never your suffering, but then Germán was thinking about the difficulties of conversing without common grounds. I would say, I don't know if I am very realistic about that, that our vulnerability makes us feel our common humanity. So if we try to express it, express our feelings, that sensible environment, emotional environment helps people to develop their own voice, their difference, but also their community in suffering. That's what I would say.
Thanks, Angela. I think that JP also wanted to ask a question. So
Okay, can you hear me?
yep.
Okay, thanks. So I have two questions for probably like all the speakers. This is also like a question about like how you like practically use dialogue in a community, especially when this community uses like a lot of social media. So one of my questions is like, how does social media contribute to like political and social polarization, given that people tend to follow content that aligns with their existing beliefs, and this reinforces that idea? What steps can we take to foster dialogue and understanding across different viewpoints in this environment? So that's one of the questions. And the other is like, speaking of like different beliefs and mindsets, what do you think about different cultures? So you were also mentioning like, well, you talk about Western cultures, but what about the others? Like when you're trying to have a dialogue with other cultures, what do you think, what is wrong, what is correct, and how you find like a balance between different cultures? So those are my questions. Whoever wants to.
Does anyone want to reply? Pete, Angela, Germán, I don't know.
I would like to say something about that. I think we are still thinking about dialogue as a mean towards an end, which can be common ground, consensus, whatever you call it. But I want to stress that the meaning of dialogue is an end in itself. It doesn't matter that we have different starting points, that's obvious, and it doesn't matter if we don't agree in our points of view. So just the habit of opening for dialogue makes a transformation. That's what I've heard from several authors, but also in our previous session to prepare this dialogue. That was something that all of us stressed, that dialogue is already transformative. Just the possibility of dialogue. Of course, I think in the long term, we cannot keep on conversing and conversing the whole life, no? Because you want to act as well. In the long run, it might be possible to refine positions and broaden perspectives, so we can eventually reach some small agreements that can make us possible to live together. Hopefully, but that's only a possibility.
Thank you, Angela. I see that Valentina also wants to reply to JP's question. She said, she said, I know I'm not a speaker, but I want to say something about it.
I'm sorry. I know I'm not a speaker. It's a really good question. And is that I recently read, because I'm having a class actually on religion and international politics, and I took kind of the Southeast Asia region of study of like Sri Lanka and Myanmar. And there was this one study, there are a lot of YouTube videos about it, but it's kind of the role of social media in the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar. And it is basically that the country, like until 2012, it was completely closed. And Myanmar is a super rich country in resources, and it was completely closed. And then it kind of opened up to multinational companies, and internet connection got to Myanmar. And Facebook made a deal into having Facebook downloaded immediately into every single phone device that was sold in Myanmar. And they only had one Burmese kind of moderator that was in California, not in Myanmar. So it was a completely like unregulated social media platform. And the Theravada monks, Theravada is like this one of the branches of Buddhism that is one of the most radical ones, kind of started to spread lies and hate messages against the Muslim minority population in the Rakhine state in Myanmar. And there's this whole analysis, like actually Mark Zuckerberg was questioned in the US because of Myanmar, like because they were kind of enabling hate messages and even genocidal stages in Myanmar. So I find that social media is a tool that can be used to expose yourself to other opinions and is very useful in a country. Because if you, for example, I'm gonna use the example of Switzerland because right now I live in Switzerland, but a person in the mountains, in these little Swiss towns, they wouldn't really get exposed to other opinions if it's not through social media. And you have that across other different countries. But the danger of social media is kind of confirmation bias. So how the algorithm works. So the more things you like, the more things will appear like that. And then you see that in past elections with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and then the whole scandal of Cambridge Analytica using data to promote Donald Trump. And I mean, there was a whole process about this, but I feel that social media is a great tool if you really use it to expose yourself to other opinions and not just completely kind of close yourself to them and use it as a confirmation bias. Because I think that is when it gets a bit into the polarization of how can social media can even further polarize these type of things. And then you also have to look into who owns the social media platform and how it's regulated. Because then in China, you see that there's no polarization in social media. But why is that? Is because the owners of social media is the state. So the state is the media control. I'm not saying that this is good or bad. I'm just saying that you're only presented with one option. In the US, for example, right now, social media platforms or the free speech is in danger because of these type of things. Like the content that you see in social media in Europe is very different to the one that you see in the States or in different countries. So I find that that is like the danger of social media. And then you also have this more personal level of social media that is kind of like, for example, me, I do not like anything political on Instagram because I know other people can see what I like and what I don't like. Like you can see how other people. So then like for me, I just prefer like I just save it if I'm really interested in it. I do follow some like news outlets and political pages in Instagram and social media, but I make an effort to do not like or comment anything political in my social media. Why? Because I know that anyone can see that and anyone may use that against me. So of course I am kind of own censorship me, you know? And then second of all, I have seen people like some very questionable things, and that has changed my opinion in them. Like I have seen some people who I thought that were different, and then I see that they like something, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know this person thought about it like this. And just one post can change your perspective on someone else completely. So I find that that is also like something that we're exposed in social media. I find that it's a very interesting topic. That's why I wanted to answer, because there are so many like layers to it. And then as well, just I'll finish with this, that is the use of social media today to record the different types of human rights violations and human suffering that there is. So you have in international law what is called open source investigations. That is basically anyone can record anything and post it on social media, and this can be used in international courts. So this is a super useful tool as well, because I mean, in the case of Myanmar, like continuing the case of Myanmar, there have been filmings of villages being burned. And that is how it has been like proven by satellite image and these open source type of things. And right now in the Middle East, there's tons of unregulated content that you see. So then there's also the danger of minors watching this type of things. So the regulation is very poor in cybersecurity and international law. It's very poorly developed. So I feel that that is also another side of social media that you can see. Like it's super, super, super layered. But coming back into the important thing that is the philosophical aspect is to really see how the algorithm is super personalized, and that is sometimes a bit scary to see that because it's confirmation bias all over. So I don't know, it's really interesting to see like how in the future maybe the owners of the platform are also gonna implement these type of changes directly in the US. Like I know that the policies in the US are different from the ones that you accept. Like the terms and conditions in the US are different from the ones in Europe. So for example, on Instagram, I have more like unbiased content that I would have if I lived in the US. Like especially in Switzerland as well, because in Europe, they have a strong data protection laws. In other countries, they don't. So then you also have that type of thing. So I don't know. It's very interesting. Yes.
Thanks, Val. I know that there's some people that have to go now, but if you all agree, the ones that can stay, we can extend the dialogue for a little bit longer, as I know that there's a lot of things that are, that are left to say. So I don't know if any of you wants to say anything else. Maybe one of the speakers or Jackie or anyone else that is here. Because I do think that this session is actually really important as a little bit of a context. Our next session, we're going to have a dialogue on war, conflict, and ecology. And we're going to have people from Palestine that are going to be joining us, as well as people here in Colombia. And I know it's a little bit of a polemic topic, so I think it's important for us to take advantage of this space in which we are grasping how to navigate these ethical tensions and how to carry out on these conversations. I want to rescue this idea about that Diane mentioned in her intervention, that we cannot change a community unless we're changed individuals ourselves. And I will link that to Angela's advocacy for a philosophical way of life, because he couldn't join us today, but there's a student from the philosophy faculty called Germán, and since the first dialogue, we've been talking a lot about how maybe taking into account what's the grasp of philosophy in this type of situation, it's more about of a change in disposition and about how you can inspire others. As for me, I can see that usually the way that I speak about things, or when I share my viewpoints with people who do not study with me, they usually tell me that I have such a beautiful way of speaking or thinking, etc., and that I have helped them be inspired to think a little bit differently and engaging with life in a more different way. So I think it's important because, of course, philosophy is also made in dialogue, as Angela said. Even since Greek philosophy, we can see the Platonic dialogues, etc., and it's how this thinking and this ethical way of life is made in conversation and with exchanging ideas with other people, and how this changing ideas with other people can help change our vital disposition, and we can start taking into life differently and so forth. We can actually start getting into action. I remember in last session, we were talking about Marx, and of course about this idea of we have already had enough of interpreting the world and we have to change it. But it's actually very difficult to just jump in and changing the world if there is not a previous interpretation and a change in disposition that could ensure the conditions for an actual change. And I think that what we discussed today, it's even a previous step for that, which is engaging the conditions for dialogue. Because while placing these conditions for dialogue, for maintaining these dialectical tensions that Angela mentioned, these negative moralities, etc., we're also generating the conditions for a change in ourselves and therefore for a practical change. So I think this is also one of the things that I'd like to highlight about the dialogue and that I'd like to thread with what we've been talking about in previous sessions. I don't know if any of the speakers want to say anything else, or anyone at the public. I don't know. I think it's an amazing dialogue. The topic has been great.
I think
can I?
Sure.
One of the things I'd like to say is a very brief thing when Juan Pablo talk about other cultures or ask about other cultures. I always think that maybe we are not too far away from other cultures as we think we are. We do find common things. But we also, at the same time, are very far away from communities which are in our own culture or in our own country, so to speak. There are places in Colombia which are closer to the way people live in Africa. But those of us who are in academia in the city are closer to the way people live in Europe or the United States. So there is more distance from those communities I have from here, from those communities, than the distance which I have with most of you who belong to a world, to a Lebenswelt, to a form of life, to a world life which is very similar. So I say this because maybe we should not be so much afraid about other cultures when we have so many differences within our own cultures. And then there is this sort of trying to get some balance between the distance between brackets that we would have with other cultures. That's true that we have difference with other cultures, but maybe they are not so far away. They are not as far as we think. Right? It's just that.
That's great. I think it's very important also to take that into account, especially in a country like Colombia, because we have a great diversity geographically and in all types of senses, and we actually might be farther away from other people in Colombia than we actually can think of. And I agree with we shouldn't be so afraid of other cultures either way. And also, I think that Angela wanted to say something as well. So feel free to go.
no, I just wanted to say that the dialogue has been very, very interesting so far, but I think it's time to finish now. It's always open, the topic, for new
Absolutely.
encounters.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially also, I think in Switzerland for Bali, it's past 2 a.m. now. So
Yes, it's like 2:09, but I just wanted to say that like what Germán with the last comment is so true. And this is like one of the main reasons why I chose to study abroad and not in Colombia, because in my class, there's not a single person from the same nationality. Like not a single person. Like I am the only Colombian in the university. Like, and the other Latin American that there is from Panama. So kind of close to Colombia, but it's still different. And then we have I have like my group is a girl from Kyrgyzstan, a girl from Rwanda, a girl from Albania and the US, a guy from Israel, a guy from Sweden, and then a guy from Portugal. So then it's like a whole, and then there's also a girl from New Caledonia that is kind of a French overseas territories, but near Australia as well. So there's a different culture. So I think that has been like one of my best experiences, like being able to also be in academic circles abroad, that you are exposed to all of these type of opinions and comments. And, like, I mean, coming from, because in Colombia, I studied in the same school as Marimar. And with her, like, I feel that many times in academic circles have become that everyone thinks the same and everyone just agrees. Like someone says something and everyone is like, yeah, that's true, that's right. And it has been like this kind of, there's no variety of opinions in it. So then you have to kind of actively and proactively seek them out the different opinions. Like it was not like before where just different opinions would just emerge in a classroom, but you actually have to push different opinions to kind of emerge because everyone is so afraid of having a different opinion and being excluded from the group. And coming abroad, I have seen that, especially studying my career that is like diplomatic studies, you see, like I was shocked when I came. I was super shocked about the different opinions and the different kind of philosophical backgrounds that people have and how their own personal experience deeply influence how they view dialogue and negotiation, and how you start picking up these different micro expressions on people that come from their cultures and from their own like experiences. So it is very rich, but I feel that academic circles, again, they have to start to open up. Like they cannot, like they have been getting closer and closer, and universities start again bragging about how low their admissions rate is. And I'm like, that's not something to brag about. Like that's something to be worried about. Like why is not more people accessing like education and this type of academic circles? So no, I just find the conversation deeply, deeply interesting. I take a lot of personal key takeaways from it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Val. And thank you, everyone who's joined us. Thank you, Germán, Diane, and Angela, for accepting our invite for the dialogue. What you brought to the table was absolutely of great value. And I think we all learned a lot from it. And it was very thought-provoking, and a lot of opinions and questions emerged, which I think it's actually a signal that the dialogue was great. So thank you so much. And I hope to see you all next month for our dialogue on war, conflict, and ecology. So see you soon. And I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything or if we can just put an end to the session right here.
Diane, would you like to say anything?
Well, I was just thinking when Valentina was talking that whole issue of belonging it doesn't mean being the same, or we can't be different, but we can still belong. It's that sense of community, but we don't have to be the same. In fact, the diversity makes it richer. It's like a tapestry. It's richer because there's differences, but there is still that sense of belonging, which you're finding in your school. I think that's really important to remember, that it's not sameness. We don't have to agree on everything or think the same to belong.
Absolutely. And I think that is a great note to conclude on, that diversity is one of the key pillars of life on earth. It's one of the great pillars of God's creation. And in fact, our, turning to embrace diversity is going to be, I think, a hallmark of what generates next evolution. And it's big work, but it's wonderful and encouraging that you're doing that. And seeking it, and we should keep encouraging that diversity because it's a critical cornerstone of the story. So thank you, Maria, for hosting us. As always, such a beautiful dialogue has emerged, and I'm really looking forward to our next dialogues. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. A great pleasure.
Thank you.
It was great. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.